Ethan Caldwell was born into a world where every door opened simply by his last name. His father, Victor Caldwell, a tech tycoon who had graced the cover of Fortune magazine countless times, was a figure that made anyone in the business world wary. And as the only son, Ethan was given everything: private jet flights, lavish parties with Hollywood celebrities, and a life that had never known the word scarcity. But there was one thing money could never buy: purpose. At 17, Ethan attended one of the most prestigious private schools in Atlanta. Not through intellect nor through effort, but simply because the Caldwell name was powerful enough to turn every test and interview into a formality. Within the marble hallways lined with portraits of successful alumni, Ethan was known for three things: arrogance, designer clothes, and academic failure. His grades were a running joke throughout the school, yet teachers still let him slide. None of them wanted to risk losing the Caldwell family's massive donations when called into the office to discuss his declining results. Ethan merely smirked and leaned back in his chair. "I could buy this entire school if I wanted to. What grade could ever change that?" The words spread like wildfire through the halls, but no one dared openly challenge him. Ethan had grown used to being feared, but he never realized that deep inside he was slowly crumbling in silence. In an environment filled with heirs and children of magnates, Ethan Caldwell still managed to stand out, but not for talent. He was remembered for his arrogance, his expensive tailored suits that classmates only saw in magazines, and his disastrous string of grades. Every test came back marked with shameful numbers in red ink, yet no one dared fail him outright. Teachers feared the influence of Victor Caldwell, a man who could donate millions to elevate the school or withdraw it all with a single cold phone call. To Ethan, grades meant nothing. He often sneered at teachers' ignored warnings and treated every class as a boring performance. "One day, I'll inherit an empire. What difference can a GPA make?" That line became his catchphrase whenever anyone mentioned schoolwork. Even when his academic counselor once summoned him to warn of the risk of failing the year, Ethan lounged back in his chair, fingers interlaced like a young CEO, and replied, "If I wanted, I could buy this entire school." "Do you really think a grade can change that?" The words spread quickly, students snickering behind his back, teachers shaking their heads in defeat. Yet no one dared confront him. No one wanted to cross the Caldwells. At home, things were no better. Victor Caldwell's eyes were as cold as tempered steel. After yet another call from the school about Ethan's disastrous performance, he said bluntly, "You are a disappointment. If you worked for me, you would have been fired long ago." It wasn't a threat. It was a blade of truth cutting deep into Ethan's arrogant facade. Victor Caldwell didn't make idle threats. One evening, after receiving another report from school, he froze Ethan's credit cards, confiscated his sports car, and forced him to ride the school bus like every other student. For Ethan, it wasn't just the loss of luxury. It was the first time he tasted the raw sting of failure. Winter mornings grew longer, colder. Gone were the smooth hums of his Audi. Instead came the fumes of diesel and the crowded chaos of the bus. Ethan stepped off with a sullen face, eyes red from sleepless nights. The once familiar hallways of the school now felt harsher than ever. It was in those dark days that he noticed a figure he had never truly seen before. Near the side entrance, an older black woman bent over her mop. Her faded uniform, worn shoes, and hair peppered with gray made her blend into the dull background of the school. To Ethan, she was nothing more than background noise in his once privileged life. But one morning as he walked past, he caught her murmuring softly, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." Ethan stopped, startled. "What did you just say?" he asked, half mocking, half curious. The woman looked up, her eyes calm but piercing. Nothing you're ready to understand, boy. She smiled faintly and returned to her work, leaving Ethan frozen in the crowded hallway. For the first time, words from someone invisible struck something deep within his chest. He didn't know it then, but that moment marked the first turning point, the fateful encounter that would upend his entire life. Ethan's grades continued to plummet. Literature exam 18,100, math 24%, history 31%, biology a perfect 0. The crimson numbers were no longer a joke. Even the academic counselor exclaimed, "Ethan, you're at the very bottom of the entire class." For the first time, he had no excuse. That afternoon, trying to avoid the crowd, Ethan slipped through the side corridor and found the same janitor cleaning up a soda spill near the cafeteria. She looked up and gave a small smile. Ethan hesitated. "Last time. You mentioned Socrates. I still remember." She set down her mop and folded her arms. "And you found it strange, didn't you? A janitor quoting a philosopher?" Ethan bit his lip, lowered his head. "Honestly, I found it stranger that a boy with the world at his feet couldn't even pass a reading test." He went silent. The words cut through the last of his arrogance like a blade. Then, almost whispering, Ethan asked, "You used to be a teacher, didn't you?" The woman nodded. "Not just a teacher. I was a college professor, English literature and philosophy. But life sometimes strips you of everything, leaving only what you know. And I still know how to teach." "Then, teach me?" Ethan pleaded, his voice trembling. "Please, I can't keep failing." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine, but on one condition. Leave the Caldwell name and your pride at the door. We start from 0, from the floor." Ethan swallowed hard, eyes flickering with fragile hope. "Deal." The next morning, as fog still wrapped the schoolyard, Ethan quietly entered the empty hallway, clutching a blank notebook. She was waiting back, straight, eyes steady. Her name was Grace Wallace, and that was the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. In the days that followed, a strange rhythm began to form. Each morning before the building came alive, Ethan walked into the deserted hallways holding the notebook Grace had given him. There was no syllabus, no grading scale. She only began with questions that left him unsettled. What did this sentence make you feel? Why do you think the character stayed silent? Can you describe what courage sounds like? Grace didn't lecture. She provoked. For the first time, Ethan realized he had never truly read. Before, words were lifeless symbols. Now they became doors into hidden corners of the soul. His pages began to fill, not with answers, but with thoughts, fears, and anger toward a father who had never once believed in him. He wrote about pressure, emptiness, and the pain of being seen as a failure despite having everything. Grace read every page, slashing through hollow sentences in red ink, leaving only one note. Don't just write. Write with your soul. One late night in the cafeteria, Ethan hunched over his notebook. 2 football players walked by laughing. Look at Caldwell now, writing love letters to the janitor. Heat rose in Ethan's chest. He was about to stand when Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You can't measure depth with a shallow ruler," she whispered. Her words were soft, yet they carried more weight than any insult. Ethan sat back down and continued to write. That night, for the first time, failure didn't terrify him. In the glow of the dim cafeteria lights, he understood this journey wasn't just about saving his grades. It was about saving himself. The first reward came at the end of the semester. Ethan held a folder filled with essays marked with praise, thoughtful, engaged, clear progress. For the first time in his life, he felt genuine pride, not as a Caldwell, but as himself. When he walked into the counselor's office to meet his father, his heart pounded. Victor Caldwell stood tall in a gray suit, his eyes glued to his phone. Without looking up, he muttered, "You're late. Let's get this over with." The counselor handed over the folder. Ethan barely touched it before Victor snatched it away. He skimmed through expression unreadable. "Better, but not enough. This is what you call progress." He snapped it shut with a sharp crack. "I'm trying," Ethan said, voice trembling but firm. Victor narrowed his eyes. "With who? Your last tutor quit. Who's been helping you?" For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Then he told the truth. "Grace Wallace, the school janitor. But she used to be a professor." The room fell into silence. Then Victor let out a scornful laugh. "A woman with a mop. That's your inspiration. She taught me more than any of your overpriced tutors. She taught me how to think." Ethan shot back, eyes burning. Victor stepped closer, voice low, cutting like a knife. "You are disgracing this family. If you continue down this road, I'll cut you off. The car, the money, the Caldwell name. You'll have nothing." Ethan's pulse raced, but he swallowed hard and said, each word striking the air, "Maybe I need to lose everything to finally find out who I really am." Victor froze, his eyes icy. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the room heavy with collapse. After the fiery clash with his father, Ethan didn't retreat. If anything, he sought Grace even more, but this time he wasn't alone. One evening, he brought along a classmate named Priya, brilliant in science but struggling with writing. "She needs help," Ethan said. Grace simply nodded. The more, the better. Soon others trickled in. A boy drowning in history, a girl ignored by teachers for being too quiet. Students branded as hopeless found a place to breathe. They gathered in the dusty, unused library and transformed it into a secret classroom. Here there were no grades, no exams, only questions, debates, and lines of literature recited like battle cries. If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. Zora Neale Hurston. The function of freedom is to free someone else. Toni Morrison. It was no longer just studying, it was awakening, but not everyone was pleased. Rumors spread Caldwell's son studying with the janitor. Some mocked posting videos labeled lessons from losers. Ethan saw them but didn't react. Instead, he pinned one of his essays to the bulletin board with a bold line, "Learning doesn't make me weak. Only ignorance does." Ethan Caldwell. By morning, the paper was gone, but the message had already ignited something. In the shadows of cold hallways, a small flame had been lit, and soon it would grow into a fire no one could extinguish. The blow came on a winter morning. Grace Wallace was fired. The official reason, budget cuts, but everyone knew it was an attempt to silence the underground movement spreading through the school. Ethan was devastated. He searched every corridor but found only her abandoned mop and worn coat. The school felt emptier than ever. Not long after, a notice went up: annual speech contest, topic what it means to win in life. For most students, it was a chance at extra credit or scholarships. But for Ethan, it was his one chance to raise his voice. Not just for himself, but for the teacher who had been silenced. The night of the event, the auditorium glowed with chandeliers. Hundreds of parents in tailored coats, students pressed in neat suits, and college scouts with clipboards filled the seats. Ethan stood backstage, no shiny shoes, no custom suit. Just a navy shirt, dark jeans, and the worn notebook in his hand. His name was called. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. "Good evening. My name is Ethan Caldwell. To many, I'm just the spoiled heir who wasted a golden ticket. The failure, the boy who didn't care. They say I had everything, but I was missing the one thing that mattered, someone who believed in me." He paused, scanning the crowd, then lifted the notebook. She had no office, no title, only a mop, and a heart big enough to see through my anger. She didn't just clean the floors of this school. She cleared the fog in my mind. Whispers rippled across the room, and Ethan knew this was the moment of truth. When Ethan finished, silence hung heavy in the auditorium. Then a single clap, another, and within seconds the room erupted into thunderous applause. Students rose to their feet. Parents wiped away tears. Even teachers bowed their heads in shame. From the back of the room, a familiar figure appeared, a simple headscarf, eyes shimmering with tears. Grace Wallace had returned not as a janitor, but as living proof of Ethan's words. Their eyes met, and Ethan knew he had done the right thing. The speech went viral overnight. Headlines blazed, "Billionaire's son admits a janitor saved my life." The story traveled beyond the school walls. Universities and social groups invited Grace to speak. A local college even offered her a teaching position. Doors that had once slammed shut began to open, not through wealth or powers, but through a truth too powerful to deny. As for Ethan, he turned down Ivy League offers. Instead, he chose a small college focused on social justice. When asked why, he said simply, "Because I want to teach the way she taught me, to build a place where no one has to beg to be seen." One afternoon, Ethan arrived at Grace's modest home with an envelope. Inside were his high school diploma, college acceptance letter, and something handwritten: "I want to create the Wallace Institute, a center for those once called hopeless, but I can only do it if you'll join me." Tears welled in her eyes. "Only if we do it together," always Ethan whispered. And from that moment, a legacy began. The Wallace Institute opened in a renovated community building. No luxurious furniture, no giant LED screens, just chalkboards, worn shelves of books, and sunlight streaming through windows. But here, children once discarded, students once branded failures, discovered something they had never known, the belief that they deserved to be heard. Grace stood once again at the front, chalk in hand, her warm voice filling the room. Ethan was no longer the Caldwell heir, but the organizer building programs, yet still sitting quietly in the back row, learning like a student. Articles were written, awards followed. But their proudest moment came from a 12-year-old boy who handed Grace a notebook and said, "Miss, this is the first time I've ever felt smart." Both Grace and Ethan wept. On the opening day, an unexpected guest stood silently at the back. Victor Caldwell. Gone was the cold steel glare. His eyes glistened. After the event, he approached his son. "I didn't think I'd cry," he admitted. Ethan's voice trembled. "I didn't think I'd forgive." They embraced. Not as tycoon and heir, but as two men trying to start again. Years later, Ethan stood on stage accepting a National Education Award. He raised his head high. "They once said, I failed at everything. Until I learned one truth, greatness doesn't come from being seen, but from seeing others. And sometimes the person who saves you isn't wearing a suit. They're holding a mop, quoting philosophers when no one's listening." He paused, eyes glistening. "Her name is Grace Wallace, and she didn't just save my grades. She saved my soul." If you believe in stories that inspire, bring justice, and spark change, hit subscribe. Greater journeys are still ahead.